Deadly shooting at an Orlando nightclub last weekend is on people's minds across the country, including here in New Mexico. The shooter killed 49 people at the gay club and injured more than 50 others. The attack happened during Pride Month, when people celebrate the LGBT community, and it's also the month of Ramadan. There are many issues being raised after this attack, from calls for bans on assault weapons to the need for talk more openly about the threats LGBT people continue to face across the U.S. We want to talk about what this all means here in New Mexico. I'm joined at the table this week by Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR. Former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman is here. Andy Lyman, a reporter with NM Political Report, is with us. And Mary Torres, an attorney here in Albuquerque. And Tom, so a big list here of things to kind of get our arms around. We can't tackle it in one segment. Certainly the country's going to wrestle with this for a while. Let's start with guns. There's been some movement about assault weapon bans, and there's been some pushback from those, of course, who see this as a politicized moment and don't want assault weapons banned. Your sense of it as it's playing out right now, where are we on assault weapons? Is there some movement here in your view?
I think we've approached a tipping point with respect to assault weapons.
Okay.
When we've seen tragic events, occur in our country before that involve some type of assault weapons or mental illness and weapons, none of them have, all of them have, rose to the surface to, have us talk about on a national scale, but none of them have really ever tipped the scale. The horror and the tragedy in Orlando, though, this has really tilted the national conversation. I mean, when you have social media really overcorrecting, saying this is not a political issue, right, and saying this is about people's lives, that's one of the key tipping points that we take a look for as far as when that public conversation starts to change. And and I think we're starting to see some motion also in Congress on this issue as well. So, right, whether or not anything changes, I think that what we're seeing today at the national level is more of a concentration of how do we address the issue of assault weapons for those with mental illness, those who show up on FBI hit lists, That's right. Or what have you.
Exactly. You think about, Dee Dee, the fact that a big part of that discussion Tom talked about is how this particular person who shot everyone in Orlando got that weapon. Do you know what I mean? And whether it would have happened or not, whether they were banned or not. What's your sense of that? That's always an argument we hear, that it wouldn't have made a difference. Do you know what I mean? Are we turned a corner now on that idea?
I feel with Tom that we have reached a tipping point. And I think the filibuster in the Senate has a lot to do with that. You see people at these rallies and vigils where people are grieving with signs that say enough. Right. You see the President of the United States almost like a pitiful, helpless giant who cannot do anything and is going to one city to another, comforting the families of victims of these massacres. And you also have ISIS and Al-Qaeda encouraging the lone wolves to exploit the loopholes in our law. And the loophole that's most glaring right now, of course, is that folks like the shooter in Orlando, and I hesitate to even use his name,
with you.
That he was on the watch list, would not have been able to board a plane, and yet he was a security guard with easy access to weapons of all kinds. And there's something wrong with this picture. And we have known this for a while, but we haven't had the political courage to act.
Andy, your sense of that as well. We're going to cover everybody with this gun.
Yeah, I think Dee Dee made a great point about the watch list. It seems kind of interesting that you would not be able to board a plane, but you can go buy one of these weapons. Obviously, you're not allowed to board a plane for a reason.
Right.
Seems like it should be related to some of those weapons also.
And your sense of the tone and tenor of the country right now when it comes to guns. What's your sense of it? Assault weapons. I keep saying guns. My fault. Assault weapons.
Yeah.
I think
specifically.
I think you are. They're both correct that we are at a tipping point. I think a lot of people are using this opportunity to say, let's take a look at this. Let's not have this happen again. Right. At the same time, I think you've got people criticizing that, saying you're politicizing this whole thing, right, using a tragedy to. We can have that conversation, but is this the right time to have that conversation?
Exactly right. And Governor Johnson made that point, Mary Torres, saying, let's not politicize it right now. Let's just grieve and feel something. And part of that is, and we can't avoid it here in this discussion certainly, And a gay nightclub, an LGBT transgender folks are facing violence all over this country, transgender women. It's an amazing thing that has come to the surface. A lot of folks did not probably even realize this. It took a tremendous tragedy. Has this colored this situation in a way as you look at it because it was an LGBT community? Has something added because of that?
Sure,
Yeah.
I do think so, but it's just unfortunate that it happened there, it happened when it happened, but I still think the assault weapons, that is what I think should be the focus. I guess I'm more focused on that,
Sure.
you know, and excuse me, and I see that after we had the shooting in December in San Bernardino, 44% of Americans were saying, yeah, perhaps we should ban assault rifles. Now, right after this Orlando shooting, it's gone up to 57% of Americans, which is why I think that gave our senators yesterday perhaps the impetus to try to filibuster. At least we're going to get a vote on that. But it's not a whole ban on all guns, as you said, just certain particular certain particular weapons.
And that's always been the issue, Tom. A lot of folks who support having, rifles if you want to have them and collect them, see it as a slippery slope. Like if you're going to take away assault weapons, you're going to take away something else and something else and something else. Again, your sense of things, Mary's numbers she just pointed out, I don't hear people saying we want to get rid of all guns inside those numbers. I hear this is a very clean sense of angst here about just these weapons.
Yeah, assault weapons, I would agree. I think there is that. And it's also the process. It's the system as a whole. And earlier I said FBI hit list. I meant FBI watch list, so my apologies. But when you look at the process in Florida, you have the Florida Department of Agriculture that was responsible for certifying security guards.
Right.
I mean, does that make sense? It doesn't.
No.
And clearly it doesn't. And I think we can all play armchair quarterback, and I think all of us have done a very good job of that, not just here, but at the national level. But it's a conversation that goes much larger than just the national item. It's like coordination between the national, the federal effort, and then the local effort, as I think we've seen played out in the state of Florida, is how do you get these two aligned to make sure that lives are protected? So that's one of the things that I see.
That's a good point. It could be that, every state has a starting point. Some states lead, some states follow. So,
Sure, but security guards are not law enforcement officers, so they're, it is kind of weird that Department of Agriculture would be doing that, but they're not law enforcement officers, so that's I see that as more of a different.
That's a good point. Andy, we had our share of vigils here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and other places around the state and country. I didn't get a chance to make the Albuquerque event, unfortunately, but you were able to get down to the Albuquerque event. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was a very somber, kind of quiet event, but at the same time, there was a lot of talk of. There was a couple conversations of it's okay to be sad because obviously it's a very awful thing happened, but we should also kind of join together. And I think it was a little bit troubling because it was the day after Pride Parade or the Pride Day here, where a lot of people were actually at bars and clubs, and they talk a lot about that was their safe spot, their safe place. Maybe they don't have family they can go to, or they kind of get pushed to the side, so they go kind of join their other family. And there was a lot of people saying, I was just at a bar last night, and it could have been Albuquerque.
That's the tragedy.
Yeah, it is.
I don't think we should minimize the fact that this was a hate crime. This was not just an act of terrorism. This was a hate crime. And it's now the statistic that LGBT people are the victims of hate crimes more than Jews. And they have mobilized and succeeded in terms of same-sex marriage and other rights, and it has created kind of a backlash. I went to the web and found that there have been, since the Supreme Court ruling, 200 anti-gay laws introduced in 34 different states across the country. So there is that kind of feeling out there. And as Andy said, often gay folks go to bars for a sense of security and a sense of community that they don't find out and about. In New Mexico, I think we are very lucky to have gay folks represented in our leadership. We have a mayor of a major city. We have had 2 senators who have been openly gay, and we have a city councilor. And we have hate crimes legislation that was passed in 2003, and of course, same-sex marriage here was legalized even before it was by the Supreme Court. So we value diversity here, I think, in New Mexico a little bit more than they do elsewhere, and because of the makeup of our state. But, you know, this is the question I think that this instance poses, and that is, do we value diversity or not? Do we value diversity in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of national origin, or do we consider it a terrible danger? And there's some that do, I think.
That's right. And we're
And
seeing
that's
that play
very
out now.
dangerous because it'll create more hate crimes.
I appreciate your thoughts on that very much, Dee Dee Feldman. Are you concerned about your safety or the safety of a loved one who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender here in New Mexico? Get in touch with us by visiting newmexicoinfocus.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter. When we come back to the line, we'll look at the latest development in the investigation into a real estate deal involving former lawmaker Phil Griego.